So, you've reached level 50 and now you're wondering what to do. You've beaten Praetorium and suddenly a lot of things have opened up. You may soon notice for the first time that dungeons are telling you your item level isn't high enough, and, if we're being honest, the game does not do a great job telling you how to fix that problem. You'll see that you have access to new types of content such as the 8-man and 24-man raids, as well as deep dungeons and relic quests. We'll go over all of that, but let's start with the first thing you should do if you haven't already. If you haven't already done it, in the future you should do this as you're leveling, but it's never too late and you need to do this. Finish your job quests. Since Shadowbringers, they haven't added more job quests, but back in the day you needed to do your job quests in order to get your job gear and new abilities. These days that gear is just cosmetic. Getting your abilities might be changing in Evercold, but I doubt that those quests are going to cease to exist at that point. So, if you haven't done it, go do your job quests. If you're not sure if you've done them, they should show up as a little bonus quest under your MSQ tracker in the top left. Most of these quests are easy enough, or don't include combat at all, that your gear shouldn't matter. As for gear, at this point you've probably grown accustomed to just taking what you can get in dungeons, but this changes at level 50, and every 10 levels thereafter until you reach max level. If I refer to high level dungeons, know that I am talking about any dungeons at level 50, 60, 70, etc., since those used to be level cap, and those are the ones we find in high level dungeon roulette. If I refer to level 100, I will call them max level dungeons for the sake of this video. Until you start the dungeons for the next expansion, most other gear you get is going to be worse than what you can just buy for Poetics. I'll get to that in a moment since you won't start out with enough Poetics to buy gear anyway. The high level dungeon gear isn't necessarily worthless, at the very least you can use it to glamour if you like, and if it's better than what you're currently wearing, any upgrade is worth having. For your left side gear, you can always tell if it's better if it has a green plus for the defensive stats. As for your accessories, you'll have to check manually if the modifiers are bigger. In most circumstances, the higher item level is always better since main stats matters more than anything else. There's niche circumstances where the highest level stuff isn't the best for you, but that won't matter to you while you're going through the story for the first time or leveling a job. Most of the time, you're free to just press the recommended gear button and it'll give you all the highest level stuff you can wear. If you're only interested in playing through the story, you don't have to have fully upgraded gear, but you should try to get as close as you can. It'll just make things easier as you progress and enemies start to hit harder and harder. You will be able to pick up random gear through the dungeons in your next expansion. Using Heaven's Ward as the example, Dusk Vigil, the first dungeon, gives you I-120 gear, the next dungeon gives you I-130, the same as Poetics, and every dungeon after gives you gear that is marginally better until you hit level 60, at which point you should attempt to buy Shire gear. Every expansion prior to Evercold follows this pattern, and I assume that will continue. But you are relying on the hope that gear you can wear drops. Let's quickly talk about item level and how stats work. Item level is very simple. Once you hit level 50, your character level and item level will start to diverge. If you take a look at any item on your character sheet, you'll see where it says item level X, what classes it can be equipped by, and what the minimum level to equip the gear is. At this point, the character level will pretty much just determine at what level you're allowed to equip a piece of gear, and the item level will determine how strong it is. Your vitality and main stats are the most important stats on any given piece of gear. Now I'll quickly go over the stats. Vitality determines your max HP. Strength determines your damage for tanks and most melee classes. Dexterity is your damage stat for ranged and scouting classes. Intelligence is your damage stat for casters, and mind is your healing and damage stats for healers. Your defense stats, as you could probably guess, determine how much damage gets reduced by, but we don't really have a way to directly influence this outside of raising your item level. The rest of your stats are what we consider substats. Critical hit determines both the crit rate and how much the critical damage scales. For most builds, this will be your highest substat, but certain jobs sometimes like different builds. This won't matter until you're gearing for endgame content. Determination literally increases your raw damage and healing potency. Direct hit determines your direct hit rate, similar to crit, but the damage is a 25% multiplier that doesn't change. The direct hit rate scales better than your crit rate does, however, because of the damage scaling, it's still almost always better to go for crit. But again, this doesn't matter until you're at endgame. Skill and spell speed determine how fast your global cooldown is, and for some casters, how fast certain abilities are usable again. I'm probably forgetting something, but Summoner's Big Summon is the only thing that comes to mind that's affected by spell speed. The base GCD for this game is 2.5 seconds. Some classes have built-in speed decreases, such as Monk and Samurai, and the higher your speed stat is, the faster your GCD is. Unless they change this in Evercold, Tenacity is a worthless stat. As a tank, it increases your damage and damage reduction, but the damage scaling is so bad that it's simply not worth it, and you just accept whatever Tenacity ends up in your build rather than trying to build for it. And lastly, Piety increases the rate at which your MP regens as a healer. You should avoid building for Piety since it doesn't increase your healing or damage potential, but although I know most high-end players will disagree with me, I don't think Piety is inherently useless. A good healer doesn't need it. We have enough tools to manage our MP consumption and regen without Piety, but if you're not very good at watching your timers yet, Piety isn't necessarily a bad thing since it will help you manage your MP. But you should endeavor to learn how to handle things without it. Now, all that being said, besides your main stats while you're leveling, none of this matters. You're just going to take whatever gear is the highest item level thing you can equip. These are the level caps for each expansion. So, how do we actually start raising our item level? If you're desperate for gear, don't have any higher level jobs or friends that can run 8-man raids for you, and you can't afford Poetics gear, you can always run the highest level dungeon you have access to and hope something you can wear drops. This isn't really a great method, but if you truly have no other options, it will at least get you started. You can also run the 24-man raids for that gear. The barrier to entry for those is fairly low, but they do only drop left side gear. The method you will usually go with is buying Poetics gear. For level 50, this will be sold by Ariana and Revenant's Toll, and Oralina for the Ironworks weapons. Hismena in Idleshire at level 60. Be sure to buy the correct gear from her. They broke the naming conventions in Heavensward for some reason, and it made things very confusing. Enna in Rhalgar's Reach at level 70. Amark and Yulemore at level 80. Chianti and Razadhan at level 90, and lastly, Zircon and Solution 9 at level 100. Though, that last one won't be Poetics until Evercold. They did mention that they'll be getting rid of tomestones in Evercold, but there's so many things tied to Poetics that I personally am expecting Poetics will remain for old systems, and the new systems will be something else entirely. I could be wrong about that though, we'll just have to wait and see when that gets announced. Now, there is one other option for gearing, and if you're able to do it, it can actually be much faster than gearing with Poetics, if you don't have much Poetics stored up. This does, however, require you to either already have a high level job, or have a friend that is at least 30 levels higher than the content you're trying to clear in order to do this comfortably. Some content can be cleared with only a 20 level difference, but it is much less reliable and finicky. The more people you have, the higher level old content you can clear reliably. That said, you can clear old Savage content, or the normal final coils of Bahamut, and get gear that is the same item level as the Poetics gear you would buy. I recently did this with a friend of mine in Alexander to get 3 classes completely geared in about an hour. Now that we know where to get gear, how do we obtain Poetics? The way that you will usually get Poetics is simply by doing your daily roulettes with a class that is at least level 50. Most of the time, you will passively accrue Poetics while you're not paying attention. Note, you will not gain Poetics from leveling roulette if you are not max level. If you have a need to farm Poetics, there's not really a great method outside of just spamming whatever dungeon rewards you with the most Poetics. The Crystal Tower raids also give 100 Poetics per clear, with most runs lasting only about 12 to 20 minutes. However, you'll already be doing the Crystal Tower raids pretty often because of the Alliance raid roulette, so you may not want to run those more than you already will be. I've also seen some people mention the Aetherochemical Research Facility. If you've unlocked that, that one gives 150 tomes for some reason. A quick side note, if you're working on leveling up a class or planning to, and you're capped on Poetics, preemptively buy your gear so that you're not letting the roulette rewards go to waste. Unfortunately, you can't do that for expansions that you haven't beaten the base release for, but I digress. I mentioned Relic Weapons in the intro, but what exactly are Relic Weapons? Largely, they serve 2 real functions. The first is glamour. These are very fancy and glowy weapons that often you can design an entire glamour set around. The second is for downtime content. Even in the current expansion, the Relic grind is designed to be a big time sink for players to slowly work towards a reward. The Relic weapon is supposed to be the best weapon you can get by the end of the expansion, but unfortunately they released the last step after its vaunted stats would be relevant. Relic weapons from old expansions are just for glamour, but most of them really do look amazing. Before starting a Relic grind, you should be aware of what you're getting yourself into. Most of them aren't too bad, but in particular, the Realm Reborn grind is brutal, and this is after they've adjusted it to be easier. For Stormblood, Shadowbringers, and Dawntrail, the Relic grind is part of a different kind of side content. These are a big time sink, so be sure you actually want the weapon you're grinding for. And finally, what do we do with all this fancy equipment we're gathering? Why, it's for glamour, of course! Kidding. Only slightly kidding. I'm gonna go through each expansion and list out the different content that at one point was considered endgame. If you don't want any potential spoilers, skip to the next chapter in the video. Starting with A Realm Reborn, of course. A Realm Reborn didn't have much, but this was all the way back in 2013, so they can kind of be forgiven. First, we have the very first 8-man raid, the Coils of Bahamut. Unlike future expansions, they didn't really lock down the formula yet, so the Coils of Bahamut are actually considered the Savage level content for A Realm Reborn. There is no normal version of Coils of Bahamut. Then we have the 24-man raids in the Crystal Tower. You can also farm all of the extreme primals. New players should be aware that the way that we're intended to do this is not through the duty finder, even though you can queue for them that way. If you're interested in doing this at level, you're better off joining a Discord group that organizes these kinds of things for the community. Otherwise, you're going to be waiting a very long time for the Mentor Roulette to fill in for you. Palace of the Dead gets an honorable mention here. Although it's not endgame and you can actually enter it fairly early, it is a decent time sink if you want to max out your Aether Pool or attempt to reach floor 200, though be aware this is a very, very difficult task. Fun fact, this was actually added during Heavensward. And lastly, for Realm Reborn, we have the Zodiac Relic Weapons. Like I said, these are a very, very brutal grind. Moving on to Heavensward, we have the 24-man Void Arc raids, the 8-man Alexander raids, which have been separated into normal mode and savage, unlike the Coils of Bahamut, the MSQ extremes and the Warring Triad, and the Anima Relic grind, which is still long but not nearly as bad as a Realm Reborn. For Stormblood, we have the 24-man Evilise raids. I'm not going to be making any friends by saying these are probably my least favorite 24-man raids. We also have the 8-man Omega raids, which I think just gets beat out into my second favorite raid series. Once again, the MSQ extremes and the 4 Lord extremes, as well as for the first time a crossover trial with Rathalos and Extreme Rathalos. This fight hasn't really aged too well, but the rewards are worth it. Stormblood saw the introduction of 2 huge types of content. Large-scale instance duties, which are tied to the Relic weapon. For Stormblood we have Eureka, and Ultimate raids, starting with Ultimate Coils of Bahamut and Ultima Weapon Ultimate, if you think that you're up for the challenge. These do require you to beat the Savage tier, but I don't think you have to do that synced. Though, if you never have, maybe you should, because these are a step above every other type of content. They also reintroduced old trials, but brought up to the current level in the form of Unreal trials. These unfortunately are released only one at a time, and at present, old Unreals are not available to fight. And lastly, another deep dungeon with Heaven on High. Man, I am realizing Stormblood added a lot of content. Quick note about large-scale instance duties for old expansions. They will not be as populated. There's usually enough people in them that they're still doable, but they're far from having full instances these days. Now for Shadowbringers. Shadowbringers gave us the first of the crossover raids with the Near Raid series. It's the last time we have side story extreme trials with Whirlit, unless Evercold brings that back, though I wouldn't count on it. We have the Eden Raid series, which just falls down into my third favorite spot. We have the Bosnian Southern Front and Zadnor, Shadowbringers large instance duty and relic grind, and sadly only one ultimate raid with the Epic of Alexander due to COVID. Shadowbringers did not get a new deep dungeon for the same reason. On to Endwalker, we have the Aglaya 24-man raids, which are probably my favorite 24-man raid series, the Pandemonium 8-man raid series, a new deep dungeon with Orthos, the Extreme Trials, which are now all tied to the MSQ, This isn't inherently a bad thing, it doesn't make the trials themselves worse, but some people are upset that they don't get an additional side story. I can't say I'm particularly bothered by it, but I do get it. We have the Dragonsong Reprise, and the Omega Protocol, Endwalker's Ultimate Raids, and the new Variant and Criterion dungeons. We did not get a large instance duty or relic grind, which I think they realized was a mistake. Although the Hildebrand story was fun, it wasn't the kind of time sink that a lot of players want or need. There are relic weapons, but you only have to complete the Hildebrand story and then trade tomes for materials, so they're very easy to acquire passively. I think this was mostly an incentive to get the whole player base to do the Hildebrand story because a lot of love is put into that ridiculous side project. Now, gearing in current content is different than old expansions, so I'm going to say my piece about the rest first before going into Dawntrail. If all of that seems like an overwhelming amount of content, you're right, and this is just for battle content. Final Fantasy XIV is an old game, and with the exception of seasonal events and Unreal Trials, Square Enix doesn't remove any content. That also means that you have all the time in the world to play all of it. There's no rush. Please, from all of us longtime fans and players, take your time and enjoy. The content will be there for you when you're ready, and don't feel obligated to do any content that you don't enjoy. There is so much stuff to do, and hardly any of it is a barrier to any other piece of content. The only thing you might have difficulty with is finding a group for old high-end content, but there's many Discord servers out there for exactly that, and right now I'm considering making my own Discord server for our own growing community here. So finally, Dawntrail. First we have the 24-man raids, which is a crossover with FF11. I didn't personally care much for the story, but the raids themselves are fine. The wrestling-themed 8-man Arcadian raids, which are personally my favorite raid series, and I don't think that's a recency bias. I can't wait for them to make the ultimate raid and it be this massive Royal Rumble where we get to defend our champion title. We have the new Deep Dungeon and Variant Dungeon, with the Pilgrim's Traverse and Merchant's Tale. Of course, the Extreme Trials and their mount farm. I should add, the Dawntrail mounts are arguably best in the game, absolutely worth farming. We have the Ultimate Raids, Futures Rewritten Ultimate and Dancing Mad Ultimate, and last but not least, Occult Crescent, Dawntrail's large instance duty and relic grind. As I mentioned, gearing in current content is different than old content, and is going to change again in Evercold, so if you're watching this after January 2027, go ahead and skip to the end, and if I'm wrong about Poetics, well, I guess most of this video is obsolete. If you don't care about having the best gear, a few options are available to you. In order of ability to improve, we have the old Tome Gear at I-750. This gear can be improved, but it's not really worth the effort since it uses some of the same materials we would use to improve the current Tome Gear, or would require you to farm old Savage content, and there's not really enough groups running that. There's normal raid gear at I-770, which cannot be improved. Crafted gear, which you can buy from the market board, is also I-770, but it can be augmented up to I-780. And every week we can buy up to 450 tomestones of mnemonics, which you can use to buy the current unaugmented tome gear. This gear is I-780 and can be augmented up to I-790. A few months before the launch of Evercold, this 450 cap will be raised to 900. I'll explain how to augment in a moment. If you're starting from nothing, the best option is going to be the crafted gear if you can afford it. If you don't have a good amount of gil, then your second option is going to be buying the old tome gear and using it to run the normal raids to get the I-770 gear. You can also run the highest level dungeon you can to scrounge together dungeon gear. The two current highest max level dungeons give I-755 and I-765 gear respectively. If you can afford crafted gear, go ahead and buy it and equip it. Make sure you get high quality or you'll have to buy extra to afford the upgrades. Once you have a piece, you can then trade it to Irene here, I think that's how it's pronounced, for grade 3 certificates. Buy the amount of Treno Rain you need for that piece of gear, and then trade the Rain and certificates for the piece that you want. This will cost a total of 3,600 mathematics tomes for a complete augmented crafted set. There's multiple ways to get the augment materials for the tome gear. You can buy it directly for hunt nuts. You'll probably want to join a hunt train Discord because they coordinate the times for that in every world. You could potentially get it directly from the Savage raids if you roll high enough, but given the premise of this section, they're probably not running Savage raids yet anyway. And lastly, you can trade for coins from the Alliance raids. You can farm the two previous raids as much as you want for their coins, but the third one you can only get once per week. You need all 3 coins to buy the augment materials. Thundersteep Twine is used for the upgrade of your left side, and the Glaze is used to upgrade your accessories. Once you have the upgrade materials, go to Theon in Solution 9 and trade the piece you want to upgrade with the augment materials, and you're good to go. Note, if you've melded it, remove your melds first. They will not transfer over to the new piece. The main trouble with going directly through any of these paths is that you do not get to choose your substats. If you do care about your substats, or if you want to run Savage content, I recommend visiting the Balance Discord and looking up the build guides for your job. The link for that will be in the description. Sites like Etchro also have builds for every job, but without context, this might be a bit confusing to look at for a new player. Best in Slot sets, or BIS, are primarily a mix between Augmented Tome Gear and Savage Gear. Don't worry, the best gear has already been mathed out by other people. If you have any questions about all this, feel free to ask in the comments. This is a lot of information us veteran players understand. Lastly, for weapons. The easiest weapon to get with the least amount of effort will be crafted. If you have the time to sink into it, the Relic grind is part of the Colt Crescent. At the time of publishing this video, these weapons go up to I-775, but by the end of the expansion, they will be I-795 and the absolute best in slot. It's just too bad you can't have them while they're relevant to any content. The process to get these is way too long for me to explain here, but if you're interested, I recommend looking up a guide on the Phantom weapons. I'm sure there's at least one good guide out there. This content is worth doing, especially if it's your first time, but it is a pretty big time sink, so just be aware of that. The best weapon you can get for not a ton of commitment would be the weapons dropped from the Extreme Trials. If you're thinking about getting into harder content, Extreme Trials are a lot of fun and a good first step into endgame content. Not only that, but the mounts of this expansion are really nice. Extremes are going to be harder than any story content, but none of them are so difficult that you can't learn them with just a little bit of effort. Hector Hectorson is the most popular channel these days for Savage and Extreme guides, if you want to get into them without being blind. We're finally at the end. Once again, Final Fantasy has a ton of content. You shouldn't expect yourself to get through it right away. Like I said, none of this content is going anywhere, so give yourself time and focus on the stuff you enjoy. If you want to do old content synced, join a Discord group. I probably am going to make that server, and it'll be welcome to all players of any level. Keep an eye on the video descriptions if you're interested. And that's all we've got for today. As always, like this video if you found it helpful, share it with others, subscribe for more, and leave a comment if you have your own advice. Let me know what your favorite piece of content is. You can catch me here on YouTube for my live streams a couple times a week, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!